Great, it's a privilege to be with you here this afternoon. The title of my talk is Quantified Self in Crisis, Personal Knowledge Work for Urgent and Emergent Health Problems. And although my day job is work as a research scientist at the University of Washington, I'm not really talking about that. I'm here as a person with Parkinson's who's trying to understand my health. And for those of you who are new to the QS community, you might be asking yourself, wow, there's a lot of detailed and sophisticated technology that's being used, and could I actually pull this off? And QS, I believe, is for everyone. And I'm going to talk about 3 very simple studies that I did that I call quick studies. They're very basic to actually understand my health. To give you some examples. But the second thing, and a minor theme that I'm going to move in and out of throughout the course of telling the story of my data, is to raise the question about what's the role of emotionality in QS. What do we do and how do we respond to the data that we actually get back? And that's a minor theme. The major theme is going to be the 3 quick studies. Stress. We all know about this. You wake up in the morning, there's no coffee in the house, you're kind of late getting out the door, kids miss the bus, so you have to take them to school, you get to work, and you realize that you missed a very important meeting that didn't get in your calendar. People are pretty upset, right? Well, cognitive scientists and neuroscientists tell us that we don't think very well in these type of circumstances. And in fact, we miss a lot. We cone our attention on certain variables to the exclusion of others. We can't see the forest through the trees. We're actually not going through the mechanics of mathematics or problem solving very well. And this is particularly important for PWPs, people with Parkinson's like myself, because we can have motor complications or side effects that sometimes hit us at the most inopportune moments, and we don't get to choose those. For example, consider rush hour traffic. You're trying to change buses and get to an important meeting, and you have a motor complication. That's a big deal. It actually happened to me. Many people in my office, my PD is well controlled. I work with have a great relationship with my clinical team, and I was on my way to a research meeting, and I found myself stuck between buses. And I'm like, wow, what is that about? Well, to be trite, don't stress QS, right? Because QS can be a rational tool to help us understand and give us empirical results with which we can act with some confidence. And I'm being trite now, but I'll come back and unpack that a little bit more in the end. So that incident, shortly after that incident, I began to think that I really needed to understand this on-off phenomenon for myself. Not intellectually what all the papers said and the clinical researcher said and even my other Parkinson's friends said, but I needed to understand what was going on with me. Now, I use the Android, the poor man's iPhone, and I downloaded a very simple application. These folks have been talking about all kinds of sophisticated stuff. I'm a pretty basic guy. So all timestamp does is allow you to create a label and hit a button, and it associates a specific time with that label. That's all it does. And I was interested in, let's see, 5 categories. Can't even count here this afternoon. I was interested in knowing when my medications were kicking in, when I was going on, when I was stable, when I was going off my medications, but also when I was experiencing dyskinesias or dystonias. And I kind of lumped that all into a big bucket because I wasn't interested in the nuances of what type of dyskinesia or dystonia was there. But I just wanted to kind of get a basic understanding of what was going on here. This app has an export feature, like many apps, which is really important because I didn't want to try to do data analysis in the same interface that I did data collection, and that's kind of an important principle to carry forth. And then I could get it into an Excel spreadsheet, and I'm a little geeky like Sarah as well. So what did I learn? I'm not going to show you the actual graph, but I'm just going to summarize here and give you a little bit of a synopsis. Well, it turns out that I was much more dyskinetic than I thought, but they were subtle. Prior to tracking, I wasn't even aware of the dyskinesias in my body. And they were occurring far more often than I initially thought. And I thought, what's that about? And then I noticed that they followed a pattern. So it's quite common in PD to have, at your peak dose, some dyskinetic movements, right? When it gets kind of over a threshold and you're feeling great, but you're kind of dyskinetic. But I was having small, nuanced dyskinetic movements at other times as well, and I couldn't figure it out. So it turns out, and I'm relatively early in the course of my diagnosed disease, although it's been with me largely, likely for a decade or more, that I have something called diphasic, the early stages of diphasic dyskinesia, in which when the levels of levodopa in my brain are like kind of ramping up and ramping down, and at peak dose, I get small dyskinetic movements. I never would have even recognized that those were going on had I not done this study. And then I did some reading, and it turns out, I thought, wow, this is great, what can I learn about it? It turns out this is one of the most difficult problems to manage in all of Parkinson's in some sense, because it doesn't respond really well to the traditional approaches that clinicians often take, especially as they worsen over time. So, wow, I found that out, that's great, but it's not really a great problem to have. So the temptation, of course, is to default to this stress mode, something that cognitive scientists call hot cognition, when you're trying to actually do work, but you're so kind of emotionally wrapped up in something. But then I took a step back and I said, can QS actually help me get a handle on this? Can it give me something to do in the moment, and then provide a kind of systematic way forward for me to act in an evidence-based way? So before I move on, one of the things that I did at this point is I realized, based on the first quick study, that I needed to really focus my efforts on treatment strategies to keep the levodopa levels in my brains as steady as possible. And I needed to really hit that problem hard. So I went to clinicaltrials.gov, did a ton of research, and got myself into a clinical trial of continuous subcutaneous apomorphine. I'm in that trial now, and I'm wired up as I speak. But before I went into the trial, I was concerned about the question, how am I going to know if this medication is working for me? How will I know? And I began talking with Sarah about whether or not finger tapping could be used as more of a global proxy for function in PD. And so I decided to give it a shot. But I wanted to do comparative effectiveness research for me, N of 1. So I had a baseline and could actually begin to tell how not only this trial, but how other interventions would stack up against one another. So comparative effectiveness research for me. So I actually, just as Sarah described, we downloaded, again on the poor man's iPhone, this app called CNS Tap. And I decided that I wanted to make it pretty challenging, so I would hold it in my hand here, and I would actually tap like this. And it's really important when you do quick studies, for those of you who haven't done it, that whatever intervention you do consistently. And so put some thought into that piece of it. And I would tap with my left hand and then tap with my right hand. And then this is kind of data that comes out. Very simple. Left, right, that's how many taps you could do in 10 seconds. What did I learn? Well, interesting. Before I entered the trial and started taking apomorphine, I actually did this finger tap test in this series on the top. And 45 is kind of an arbitrary line that I put in as indicating my basic function. So anything above 45 taps per 10 seconds is considered adequate function for me right now. Well treated, and anything under would be less well treated. And a couple things to notice. One is the left and the right sides didn't always track one another very closely. The amplitude is really quite high. I moved from going way up here to way down there, and then much of the time I was spending in this kind of lower, below 45, which wasn't great. After I began taking apomorphine, I did a little series here, and here's this 45-degree line, and you'll notice that's shifted up, so I'm spending a lot more time up here, and the amplitude I think is slightly less, although I haven't actually done the data analysis to figure that out, so that's still an open question. But quite dramatically, my left and right sides are tracking much closer together. And this was very interesting. It told me that my new treatment was indeed working, that I really needed to redouble my efforts to prioritize and focus on continuous treatment strategies for my PD. but it raised something else. I needed to understand how apomorphine was actually interacting with the other drugs I was taking. There's very little data in the US. In Europe, it's been used for some time, but also the side effects. And so I started another study, and Sarah knows a lot more about this than I, but med tracking to reduce side effects. I'm focused on just me, and Sarah's done a lot of interesting work even with other folks. So I downloaded Pill Tracker from the Google Play Store. It was simple, you could group items, it had an export function, so it was good there. But it lacked dimensionality. So it was basically meant just, it's kind of a stupid little app. I mean, you just track your medications. Well, yeah, how interesting is that? But I wanted multiple dimensions, and so I just repurposed it. It's a data collection tool for me, and I like to repurpose things. And it didn't involve any code, right? I'm a pretty simple guy, and I just want to use it. I didn't want to code, not for this anyway. And so I actually just put in, instead of medication, I put in off time. So I'd encourage everybody, if they start QS projects, just repurpose the apps. On, off time, actually some side effect stuff here. When I put my Apo in and take it out. What did I learn? Well, I've got some fascinating things to share about that, but I don't have clinical data to share with you yet because it's in process. But, and I'm part of a clinical trial, so I want to be a little bit sensitive to that as well. I don't want to jeopardize my participation in that trial because it's a key part of my treatment plan. But I was so excited to tell my clinical team about what I was doing. Wow, look at this, you know, look what I was collecting this, and look at this raw data, and this is how I synthesized it, and all of this stuff. Well, let me just offer a quick word of advice about that. It's really important, I have found, for me, N of 1, to reduce, when you do quick studies, to reduce everything to an information bit. A pithy statement or an information graphic that just says one thing. Because clinicians don't have the time. They simply don't have the time to actually understand much more than that. And share results, not hypotheses, because clinicians, not only do they not have the time, many are not trained in the exploratory sciences, either as those of us who are researchers or research scientists, but also those of us who are PWPs, right? We're used to tracking things all the time because we have to. Our back is against the wall, and we do it. But we can't expect clinicians to do that because they're not really trained and don't have the experience necessarily to do that. You will get a response like this, I guarantee it, if you take up too much of their time or have them sift through raw data. If you want to know more about how effective ways to kind of manage your physician and organize them and use information management techniques, Sarah wrote this wonderful article on patients organize and train doctors to provide better care.
We wrote it together. We'll send it to you if you put your name on a paper at the back, your email address rather.
It actually, it's a great paper, and it's gotten some fascinating pushback in some different areas. Some takeaways, and I'm going to end with these slides. For folks like us, problems choose us on their timetable, not ours. We as people, we as Parkinson's, people who deal with Parkinson's day in and day out, can't choose the timing of when these events occur. And I think that that's a fundamentally fundamentally different than folks who do QS in other arenas that don't have their backs against the wall. It doesn't elevate one type of study over another, but it does add, I think, a sense of urgency, and also can be sometimes, depending on the severity, can be moments of crisis. We need to be able to, and QS I think is one tool to be able to help us think systematically in these moments of crises. They're very feasible for all of us to do. These kind of simple studies, we can repurpose existing tools, we can focus on small sets of variables, streamline our data collection, utilize the export feature so we don't have to work with the data in the same interface that we collect it. And we engage in this iterative cycle of collecting, analyzing, reflecting, acting, revising kind of way. And these quick studies add value. They provide a rational tool to understand, empirical results to act, and can be very effective when communicating with the clinician as long as the information is distilled into a pithy information graphic or phrase. And I'll end with this, but I also think that QS and emotionality are inextricably intertwined. And here I'm going to kind of just a teaser for further thought. I think QS is provides rational insight into our situation, and that's why we turn to it, right, as a method. But QS is not neutral. It can tell us things that are sometimes bad news. And it also can add stress in the logistics of collecting, sifting, sorting, analyzing data. Like Sarah said, it takes a lot of work. And PWP's in the room, how many people have extra time? We're really doing a lot to manage our lives in the context of Parkinson's. But I think more work is needed in the QS community at large at understanding this dimension. Because for us, the focus is on you, right now, in the moment, and it's a moment that we don't always get to choose.
Yeah.